My parents generously offered my sister Luna $900,000 for her wedding. This allowed her and her husband to purchase a stunning home in a prestigious area. I was genuinely happy for her, although I couldn't help but feel a little ignored, considering the differences in how we were treated. While we thought Luna was the favorite child, she always got the latest gadgets and trendy clothes, while I grew up with hand-me-downs and worked part-time jobs from the age of 14 to buy the things I wanted. I learned from an early age to be independent and didn't expect much from my parents beyond the essentials. For years later, when my partner, Eilish, proposed to me, I was ecstatic. We envisioned a simple yet elegant wedding that wouldn't drain our savings. Surprisingly, my parents stepped in and offered to pay for the entire event. It was unexpected, especially since they had never shown such financial generosity towards me. Their involvement and enthusiasm made me feel recognized for the first time. The wedding day was exactly what I had expected, a modest and intimate gathering of loved ones. Yet, the warmth of that day soon cooled off when, just days later, my parents sent me a bill for the full cost of the wedding. Stunned and hurt, I decided to pay the bill and subsequently cut off contact with them to heal from this betrayal. Meanwhile, my sister Luna, angry at my decision, showed up at my door, creating a scene. Despite the confusion, the independence I had cultivated from a young age strengthened me during these difficult times, allowing me to move forward with my life alongside Eilish, free from the unequal expectations and disappointments of my past. During my wedding celebration, my parents actively participated, giving moving speeches and sharing dances that radiated pure joy. It was an exceptional moment in which I felt completely recognized and valued by them, almost as if they were truly proud of me. My husband, Eilish, and I were looking forward to our honeymoon the following week, although we had to finish some work obligations first. However, just 2 days after the wedding, I was surprised by an email from my father. Expecting perhaps a sweet note or a thoughtful wedding gift card, instead, I found a cold and formal message with a detailed invoice attached as a PDF. It outlined every expense they had incurred for the wedding, demanding prompt payment. The total was precisely $57,466, down to the cost of the last appetizer and flower arrangement. I was shocked, feeling like I had been punched in the stomach, and I was enraged when he saw the email. It wasn't the financial burden that upset us. We could handle the cost, but the principle. My parents had insisted on paying for the wedding, presenting it as a gift, and actively participating in the planning. However, now they were treating it as a transaction, reversing their initial gesture of goodwill. This felt like a stark contrast to the way they treated my sister Luna at her wedding, where they generously gave her $900,000 with no strings attached. The disparity in treatment between Luna and me had always been a subtle undercurrent in our family dynamics, but this act felt like a confrontation. After a restless night, I discussed our options and decided on a course of action. I decided to write a check for the full amount to settle the debt, but I also wrote them a letter. In it, I expressed my deep hurt and disappointment. I recounted my lifelong struggles since I was 14, struggling on my own while they lavished Luna with support. I explained how their offer to fund the wedding had initially seemed like a sign of equal love and appreciation, which made their subsequent demand for payment all the more painful. In my letter, I was candid about the years of emotional neglect and favoritism I felt they had displayed. This wedding bill was the final straw, a cruel deception that redefined our relationship. I stated clearly that this would be our last financial interaction. Thereafter, I would refuse any offers of help, support, or gifts from them, setting a boundary to protect myself from future disappointment. This decision was not easy, but was necessary to preserve my well-being and dignity in the face of what I perceived as manipulation disguised as generosity. I decided I no longer needed anything from my parents, not even the inheritance. I told them they could give everything to my sister Luna, as they used to do. I sent the check, bought a gift for my mom, and then blocked their numbers. I needed some breathing room, and Eilish, my supportive partner, agreed with my decision. Initially, I felt a sense of relief after I emailed everything. However, their silence in the following days was deafening. I heard nothing from them, which only intensified my feelings of resentment. Then, suddenly, a flood of messages began from distant relatives, aunts, uncles, and family friends. I was bombarded with calls and text messages accusing me of being ungrateful and over the top. They claimed my parents had always looked after me and that I was just blowing the situation out of proportion. Luna was no different. She called, accusing me of tearing the family apart. She argued that I should have just quietly paid the bill. It was typical of her to take their side, and why wouldn't she? I have not responded to any of them because I'm at a loss for words. On one hand, I feel like my actions were justified. After being treated like the lowest priority for so long, I saw this as the breaking point and an opportunity to stand up for myself. But on the other hand, I wonder if I'm being too sensitive. It was unreasonable to expect them to treat my wedding like they had Luna's, as a gift. Maybe I should have just quietly dealt with the bill and moved on. Elaine's family has been incredibly understanding throughout this ordeal. Her parents were horrified to hear how my family had treated me and called us daily. However, the continued disapproval of my own family is getting to me. I'm starting to doubt if I made the right decision. Should I have tried to argue things with my parents before cutting ties? Or was I right to set boundaries after feeling undervalued for so long? Now, I'm really at a crossroads, not knowing if I'm the one to blame. Part of me feels like I had every right to be upset and stand up for myself, but another part of me wonders if I just caused an irreparable rift in my family. Maybe I should reconsider my approach, but I'm still figuring out the best way to move forward. Since my last update, things have only gotten worse. I never imagined that sending a check and a letter would spark such consequences, but here we are. Yesterday, I received an unexpected email from my mother that I hadn't blocked because it came from her work address. The email was long and preachy, revealing that the bill they had sent was not to be taken seriously. She claimed that they never intended to cash the check. According to her, the whole scenario was a test of my financial responsibility, a life lesson they made up to see how I would react. Once they felt I had learned my lesson, they planned to destroy the check and surprise me with a wedding gift of $300,000. I was stunned by what I read. A life lesson? How could my parents play such a deceitful game with their adult daughter? It became apparent that their actions were not about love or justice, but about exerting control. They wanted to see if I would submit or defend myself. It felt manipulative and harsh. Without thinking twice, I deposited the check via mobile banking, determined not to let them rip it up after knowing their true intentions. I wanted the check to go through, and I wanted them to face the consequences of their scheme. In response to my mother's email, I sent a short and direct response. Thank you for clarifying that this was a calculated test and not a misunderstanding. After sending that, I also blocked their work email. I anticipated further attempts to contact me, but had no interest in participating in any more of their games or supposed lessons. The situation escalated later that evening when Luna, my sister, showed up unexpectedly at my apartment, banged on my door, and screamed. Initially, I didn't answer, hoping she would go away. However, she persisted, eventually yelling through the door and accusing me of being childish and overreacting. She argued that our parents were trying to teach me something valuable, but I couldn't see any merit in their methods. My parents had always been concerned about my spending habits, and to teach me responsibility, they made some decisions that didn't sit well with me. When Luna, of all people, criticized me for my reaction to their methods, I flew into a rage. Despite never having paid her phone bill or working without financial support from our parents, she had the nerve to lecture me about financial prudence. As she continued to berate me, I began silently recording our conversation on my phone, not knowing what might happen next, but wanting to have proof in case things escalated further. Luna claimed I was causing a rift in the family over something minor and insisted I should apologize to our parents and move on from it. She maintained that they had always done what was best for us and that the entire situation was my fault for overreacting. I decided not to answer or even open the door, but to just sit there, listening and seething in silence. After what seemed like an eternity, she stormed off, but not without labeling me selfish and accusing me of trying to cut family ties over financial issues. Once she left, the silence weighed heavily on me. Luna's outburst only deepened my conviction that she would always take their side, regardless of how unfair or hurtful their actions were. That night, my phone was bombarded with messages from my extended family. It seemed Luna had spoken to my parents immediately after leaving and mobilized them against me. I received text messages from aunts, uncles, and even some family friends, everyone echoing the same sentiments. I was ungrateful. I was causing unnecessary problems. I needed to apologize for my behavior. A message from an aunt I hadn't communicated with in years stood out. She told me I was lucky to have parents who cared enough to teach me these lessons and that I should be grateful. I was shocked at how quickly everyone turned against me, assuming my parents were right simply because they had financial power. It seemed as if no one took into account the long-standing emotional manipulation or favoritism I had endured. Instead, all they cared about was that I seemed to be rejecting what they saw as my parents' generous offering. This reaction deeply concerned Aiche. She could see the harm it was causing me. She frequently suggested I step away from social media and turn off my phone for a while to find some peace. Leish also reminded me of the countless times my parents had shown a clear preference for my sister, Luna, and how they often used their wealth to exert control over us. The most infuriating part was the lack of clarity. My parents did not reach out to explain their position. They seemed content with their version of events, presenting themselves as misunderstood benefactors and me as the ungrateful daughter who had blown the whole situation out of proportion. I began to question my approach. Maybe I shouldn't have sent that confrontational letter or blocked them. Maybe a face-to-face conversation would have been more productive. Although the experience reminded me of how those arguments typically played out, my feelings would get distorted and I would end up apologizing for feeling hurt. It was an exhausting cycle I had been stuck in for years. I wasn't sure I had the strength to endure it again. For now, my focus is on the life Leish and I are trying to build together. We hold on to hope and look forward to better days. I want to thank everyone who reached out with feedback, advice, and personal stories. Your kindness has truly been a beacon during this difficult time. The past few days, I have been caught in a storm of emotions, and your support has been incredibly valuable to me. Despite my efforts to remain resilient, recent events have taken another surprising turn. A few days after Luna's visit, I received a phone call from my uncle, my father's brother, whom I had not spoken to in many years. Given our lack of closeness and the recent pressures from other family members to reconcile with my parents, I braced myself for a similar message from him. However, what he revealed instead was shocking and reframed my understanding of the situation. He began by explaining that he had found out about my circumstances through family gossip and felt compelled to contact me. Shockingly, this was not the first time my parents had engaged in such disturbing behavior. He recounted a similar incident from 7 years ago involving him and my grandparents, my father's parents. Back then, when he resisted their controlling and manipulative tactics, they tarnished his reputation within the family, falsely accusing him of theft and ingratitude. During that time, my father did not support him. Instead, he sided with my grandparents, causing a deep and lasting rift between the siblings. My uncle shared that he felt abandoned by my father and that it had taken him years to understand and accept the dysfunctional dynamics within our family. His stories mirrored my own experiences, illustrating how my grandparents had used financial leverage and manipulation to dominate him, just as my parents were attempting with me. The more my uncle talked, the clearer it became that my parents' actions were not isolated or unusual, but part of a long-standing family pattern of behavior. This cycle of manipulation originated with my grandparents. My father, once a participant in his brother's ordeal, was now perpetuating the same role against me. This revelation not only changed my view of the current situation, it illuminated the generational shadows that had long influenced our family dynamics. My uncle shared a personal story that resonated deeply with me. He had chosen not to adhere to my grandparents' strict expectations, a decision that had serious repercussions. After their disagreement, my grandparents cut him off completely, severing emotional and financial ties, and even going so far as to tarnish his reputation within the family. He was labeled an outcast, and many relatives still cling to those fabricated stories. He claimed their actions were a means to exert control. When they realized they could no longer influence his decisions, they chose to erase him from their lives completely. Listening to his account was disturbing, as it reflected my current situation. I had recently chosen not to conform to my parents' manipulative strategies, which upset them greatly. Instead of seeking to understand my point of view, they turned the family against me. This terrible experience illuminated the pervasive and toxic cycle within our family dynamics, which were deeply rooted in control and manipulation. During my conversation with my uncle, I was left reflecting on the totality of his experiences and their implications. It occurred to me that perhaps my father's harsh behavior might be fueled by guilt, suspecting that he had unfairly abandoned his brother. Perhaps he was now overcompensating by reinforcing those same manipulative tactics. This revelation made me realize that my relationship with my parents and my sister, Luna, had always been based on obligation. They felt we owed them. Any deviation from this prescribed role was considered an act of betrayal. The more I reflected on these ideas, the more apparent it became that the problem was not me but them. Their unresolved conflicts and unhealthy patterns they had inherited from their parents. In the days that followed, the family dynamics intensified, with Luna particularly active in rallying relatives against me. Even a cousin I was close to accused me of being selfish and disrespectful. Recognizing the need for change and understanding beyond simply adhering to imposed expectations, it became overwhelmingly clear that the message I was receiving was steeped in the same tired cliches everyone else had been repeating. Reading it was a chore. Growing up, love in my family always came with strings attached, whether it was financial assistance, emotional support, or even celebrating milestones like a wedding. After I decided to break away from their expectations, I found myself excluded and isolated, just like my uncle. Throughout this ordeal, Illich has been an unwavering source of strength. After an eye-opening conversation with my uncle, Leish and I had a heart-to-heart about our future. He assured me that together we could face any cost and reminded me that I was not beholden to anyone, not my parents, not Luna, and certainly not distant relatives who had taken it upon themselves to judge my life decisions. Their support has been a pillar of strength, and I am immensely grateful for it. However, even with Leish's support, I find myself dealing with mixed emotions. The psychological toll of my parents' conditional love was significant, and a part of me wondered if it was my fault. I pondered endlessly on possible ways to fix things without compromising my principles. There might be a way to reconcile without sacrificing my mental well-being. Amid this confusion, I received a voicemail from my father, his first attempt at communication since the fight. His tone was weary, not confrontational, as I had prepared for. He expressed his desire to end the conflict and was ready to talk if I was willing. There was no apology or acknowledgement of past wrongs. However, his message hinted at a change in his stance, perhaps an acknowledgement that he would not give in so easily this time. I hesitate to respond. Part of me longs to re-engage and explore if a genuine dialogue is possible, but another part suspects this might be another manipulative tactic designed to induce guilt. My uncle's words of warning echo in my mind. They may never acknowledge their mistakes. The way forward remains uncertain as I weigh the potential for an honest reconciliation against the risk of further emotional manipulation. It seems I was wrong in my earlier belief that things could be resolved simply because they should be. If I choose to talk to my father, I must prepare myself for the possibility that nothing will change. For the moment, I am still sorting through it all, the shocking revelations from my uncle, the myriad of messages from relatives, and my father's voicemail. It's all swirling around in my thoughts, leaving me unsure of my next steps. I'd like to think that my parents are capable of change and that they might start to see me as an equal instead of someone to control. However, I am all too aware that years of such treatment will not be undone with one conversation. For now, I'm taking life one day at a time. Leish and I are focusing on building our own lives, striving for a future that is healthy and devoid of the toxic patterns we've known in our families. However, I still struggle with doubt. Am I right in standing my ground? Or am I alienating the only family I've ever known? As much as I long for a definitive answer, I find myself in the same uncertainty. But maybe that's okay. I will continue to keep you updated as things evolve, but for now, I'm doing my best to navigate through this complex situation. Update. Hey everyone, I want to express my immense gratitude for your responses. Your advice and support have been crucial as I navigate this family crisis. When I initially posted, I was unsure of my desires, but your comments have sparked several significant insights. Many of you highlighted how I have been trying to work things out with my parents to smooth over issues and maintain a facade of normalcy. I have come to accept that going back to normal, whatever that was, is not necessary or even healthy. My relationship with my parents has always been strained, and for years I chose to overlook this fact. Now I recognize that it is okay to release any expectations that things will ever go back to the way I once hoped. Some of you have also suggested that perhaps I have been too generous in assuming my father's innocence. Reflecting on this, I see the patterns and dynamics that have shaped our interactions. For a long time, I held on to the hope that perhaps my father's behavior was fueled by guilt and that he could change. I thought his actions could be excused. His years of manipulation, favoritism, and emotional control were unjustifiable. No amount of guilt on his part could undo the damage he caused. That doesn't mean I have to forgive him without question, but I realized that for my peace, I needed closure. I had to close this painful chapter of my life, regardless of whether it included reconciling with my parents. With this in mind, I decided to confront my father, a step I felt necessary for my healing, not for their sake. When we met, the man who once filled me with fear seemed diminished, almost defeated. For the first time, he seemed genuinely remorseful. He didn't explicitly say sorry, but expressed regret for the mishap during the wedding and acknowledged the unfair treatment of my mother and sister, Luna. He even took steps to ease my discomfort by asking relatives to give me space. Unexpectedly, he attempted to return the money I had sent to cover the wedding expenses. He slid the check across the table, explaining that he and my mother wanted to make amends. However, I was ready for this. I firmly refused to take the money back, explaining that our problems were not just about money. It was about a lifetime of being made to feel inferior and the emotional strain it caused. I made it clear that returning the money could not undo the years of neglect and emotional turmoil. When I refused the money, I saw frustration in his eyes, as if he didn't know how to express his regret. Maybe, for him, offering the money was a symbol of his apology, but he did not address the deeper and long-standing issues. After I insisted that I would not take the money, he sat in silence for a while. Then, with a sense of desperation, he expressed his fear of losing me. He acknowledged that things had gone too far, and he did not want to lose me. Our family was falling apart. Even though it seemed like zero, I knew true reconciliation wasn't what he wanted, not in the way he expected. I wasn't interested in going back to the way things were, or pretending everything could magically be fixed. What I needed was distance, a meaningful break from the toxic dynamics that had plagued our relationship for so long. I told him I needed to get away from the family, explaining that this meeting was about finding personal closure rather than repairing our relationship. In a recent conversation, I made it clear I wasn't going to forgive and forget. I emphasized the need for time to heal at my own pace. Surprisingly, he didn't argue or try to persuade me to come back. Instead, he simply acknowledged my feelings. This, in its way, felt like an apology. As I walked away from our meeting, I was enveloped in a complex mix of feelings. I was neither angry nor completely at ease. I had hoped the meeting might bring some closure, but real closure is rarely as straightforward and clean as we would like. There was no dramatic resolution, no tearful reconciliations, no epiphanies. The emotional issues were not over. I had spoken candidly, and now, moving forward was up to me. I have since taken several steps to safeguard my mental well-being. I have distanced myself from more family members who continued to perpetuate the toxicity, and I have been cultivating a life away from the incessant family drama. It's refreshing to finally enjoy some breathing space. Although I occasionally feel torn, I know I stood up for myself and that it was the right thing to do. But that doesn't always make it easy. There are times when I reflect on whether I should have done things differently or given my parents another chance. However, looking back on years of feeling inadequate reinforces my belief that I deserve better. Luna has not communicated since the meeting with my father. I believe she is still hurt by how things played out, but I am no longer interested in repairing that relationship. She has shown where her priorities lie, and I have come to terms with the fact that we will never have the close relationship I once imagined. Letting go of that hope has been difficult but liberating. As far as my father is concerned, his regrets seem genuine, but I'm not sure if it's enough to build our relationship. For now, I'm focusing on my well-being and happiness. This terrible experience has taught me the importance of putting myself first, so that's where I stand now. It's not the happily ever after I might have wished for, but it's the closure I needed. Sometimes, that's all you can ask for. Thank you to everyone who has supported me on this journey. Your support means more to me than words can express.